Okay, we're live now. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're very delighted to have you here for our conversation with Sonal Kohli, who's the author of The House Next to the Factory, which we'll be discussing today. I'm going to introduce our bookstore and Sonal before we start. I'm Kavya from Champaca, and as you might know, if you're here, we're an independent bookstore, children's library, and cafe. We're located in Bangalore, but we also have a new little store in Goa. And our main focus as a bookstore is to talk about diverse stories and perspectives. And we want to bring that to our readers not only through our books, but our curation and events. We have an online store that ships across India, and you can find all the books on our shelves. And also, you can find this book. So, Sonal Kohli, who we're very happy to have here, is the author of The House Next to the Factory. The book was longlisted for the Tata Literature Live First Book Award. She holds an MA in creative writing from the University of East Anglia, UK, and a BA in economics from Shri College of Commerce in Delhi University, and has received fellowships from Virginia Center for the Creative Arts and Sangam House, which means she spent some time in Bangalore. And her stories have been shortlisted for the Bristol Short Story Prize and Fish Short Story Prize. And she grew up in Delhi, as the book might indicate, and now lives in Washington, D.C. So, welcome, Sonal.
Thank you,
And,
Kavya.
and of course, we love this book and we came to it as part of our Champaka book subscription. It's the third year of our book subscription, and our theme is loneliness and connection. And we send out a book every month for our subscription. If you must know if you subscribe. And as part of loneliness and connection, we wanted to think about houses and homes. And this was just such a perfect book. And we're also very excited because the person who designed our logo, Kriti Monga, is also the one who made this beautiful cover. And everyone who's here live with us, if you have any questions or comments, you can just type them in the chat box and I'll come to them at the end after we've finished speaking to Sonal for a bit. So, Sonal, if you're ready for our conversation.
I am. Thank you so much for having me here, Kavya, and for taking out the time to talk to me.
Of course, it's always a pleasure, such a delight. We really, really liked your book so much, and we were also really very happy to stumble upon it when we were curating for our book subscription. And one of the main things, and I guess I've said that in the reel, I wrote about that in our curation note, but there's something so gentle and soft about this book. And even though it's so textured and layered with other stories, you have heavier themes that are there underneath it. And it kind of offers a restful way of encountering the world you're presenting to us. And I really love that very much. So you have mentions of very harsh moments like this, anti-sex riots of 1984. You have a lot of mention of class and a certain kind of violence, but it kind of gently, it's there for us to know, but not to kind of, come up against with pain. So I was very curious how you arrived at this tone and how long also it took you to come to that.
You know, I never thought when we write, we think about the voice of a story.
Yeah.
And as a writer, I want to get that right. But I never stopped to think about the tone of a story or the overall book. So I think somewhere when you say that it has a gentle and soft tone, I think maybe it comes from my own taste as a reader. I like books that sort of lull me, who that draw me in, a book that I can curl up with. So maybe it comes from my own taste as a reader,
Yeah.
and it's not something that I worked on. And now that I'm working on a second book, I think I'm becoming aware that maybe my writing has a certain tone,
Okay.
and which is my personal, um, I'll not say trademark, but my style of writing.
Mhm.
So, I think it's not something that I worked on. or
Okay.
even arrived at. It just, and perhaps it also has something to do with the characters or the stories that I'm trying to tell
Mm-hmm.
and what I'm trying to explore through these
Okay.
stories, which for me I think is uh, is uh, is human relationships, or what it means to be human. If it, I think that's something that I'm exploring as a reader and also as a writer,
Yeah.
and maybe that's what brings me to this tone. And you're right when you say that. I mean, the book deals with or like reflects on not reflects, but probably just touches upon big events like the anti-Sikh riots, or things like uh, the caste system, or the hierarchies of caste. But again, these were not things that I were at the fore when I was writing the stories. I mean, uh, for the anti-Sikh riots, I mean, it's such an important part of the history of Delhi as a city, and I think somewhere I did want to write about the riots, but I didn't know how I would write and what the story would be. And when I started to write 1 hour, 3 times a week, it was uh, a relationship of the tutor and the relationship that he has with his young pupils.
Yeah.
And both of them, I mean, both sets uh, have a different kind of loneliness. Like Mr. Lamba, like his wife has passed away, so he's lonely in that sense, and he has an estranged relationship with his children. And the pupils, they are 8 years old, but they live in this house next to the factory. And I mean, after they come back from school, they're pretty much cooped up within the boundaries of the house, and that's the source of their isolation. And
Yeah.
somewhere they, when both these parties come together, they form a bond,
Yeah.
which and there's and a, a soft relationship blossoms. And so what I'm trying to say is, and Mr. Lamba has this the image of this the figure of this Sikh stationer. And
Yeah.
when I saw him in the story, the whole the history of these Sikh riots, the assassination of Indira Gandhi, all that came into the story through him.
Yeah.
So, these events remain at the periphery of the story, and uh,
Yeah.
and thus the pain is not. I mean, they're not. Mr. Lamba or the students are not in the eye of the storm. They're just at the periphery of these events, and
Yeah.
I think that's why the tone is not very harsh. I mean, I'm not dealing with the trauma of that event.
But in that particular story, for example, the children are sort of saying a few slogans at the end of it.
Yes,
And almost the sideways way that Mr. Lama wonders, like, how is his friend? It was unsettling. It
yes,
kind of poked you. And I actually found that very powerful because you could have gone into it in a different way, as many writers have. And therefore, it wasn't didactic. And I found that very moving. It was sort of, it made me think because I guess I was looking at it through our curation also, that you don't know what goes on in inside the houses and what people's views on the world are
yes.
and how you might relate to the people who might experience violence and things like that. So I found it actually more effective in that way.
I think, however removed we are from these big events, it is we still there's still an emotional resonance that we feel in that moment and years later.
Yeah.
It's not something that you can just move on from, even though it did not directly affect you.
Yeah.
It becomes part of your perhaps emotional history, as it does of the city that you live
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. What sort of made you start with the house next to the factory? Because it seems like the place from which everything unwinds. And
Yes.
I felt like I was trying to think, since I am familiar with Delhi, where in the city it might be from. So I thought maybe East Delhi.
Mm.
So I was curious what where you located because it was quite, or like northwest Delhi. So
It was Northwest Delhi, but
northwest Delhi.
yes. But when I was writing the book, actually, I came to the idea that the house is central to the book only in the end, when through the
Mm-hmm.
title. I had written the whole book out and I still didn't have a title. In the beginning, I thought maybe, like with most short story collections, I'll choose a story which feels, most central, not even central, but probably which to me feels most emblematic of the book. I'll choose that title as the title of the book. But after I was done with the book, I none of the stories, stood out as like this is what the book is about. And I sat back and read the book twice just as a reader, and then this title just lifted off the book of one of the stories, or a phrase that I had used in the book. And that was when I realized that the house is central to the book. It is where the family spends their formative years. It is what uh, what forms them. It is I mean, Kavya is sort of the on and off protagonist of the book, and I feel it's sort of the source of her loneliness, the years that she spends in that house.
Hmm.
And I think it got sort of it becomes part of their personality, like I used in the quote that I used from Anita Desai's book. It's the soil that they draw from
Hmm.
for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, that's very interesting because when you say it's short stories, to me it still feels like a whole. It still feels like a total experience. Like I don't know. I read it from the top to bottom, so I don't know what it would have been like if I started with the outing, for example. And it held stronger together because of that sequence. So I was also curious if you chose to do that.
Yes, it was deliberate to tell the stories in this order.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to open with the image of the house, which 1 hour 3 times a week does. The house had two gates, so I wanted to open, and the order was deliberate. I didn't particularly want a chronological order, so we moved a bit around time because I mean, my editor and I, we felt that because this is set in India and we are well versed with the history of India, perhaps people will be able to locate where each story is set in time. And we did put some markers of time, embed them in the story.
Mm-hmm.
So on the outset, I didn't want to tell it chronologically. I just thought maybe mixing it up a little would be interesting.
Yeah. And I also really enjoyed the fact, I don't know how it is for someone who may not know Delhi in that way, but it also defies your expectations of where you might go in the city and who you might meet. So I wondered if it has something to do with how you grew up there and the places you were familiar with.
I think it has a lot to do with that. And it has, I mean, the places that I return to in my mind, maybe in my dreams. But more than that, I think as a reader, I find fiction a very beautiful way of exploring a city and of really knowing it, not like going into it as a tourist, but living in it. If you had a little apartment where you were staying, even if it's for a month or 2 months, but if you were staying there as a citizen, or as a person who lives in the city than someone who's visiting it, I find fiction is a way of uh, getting to know a place, like through Joyce says Dubliners, or Boston through Jhumpa Lahiri's work.
Yeah.
I mean, they can, like, I feel that fiction will show us places or things that a tourist guide will not be able to, a travel guide may not be able to do.
Actually, that leads to something that I was also thinking about, which is not only that there's this intimacy of the places you describe, so it was very evocative, and you could kind of smell, see the streets, and imagine the houses, but the language also felt very local in a. Sometimes I struggle with this, and this might just be me as a reader when Indian English is something we're still all thinking about, and I always wonder when do we become just English and so on. But it felt like an Indian English, but in a very, very, very settled way, just sort of like how we speak to one another, and it felt very particular to a place. So there are two questions I have for you. One is whether that was drawn from a long, whether you actively consider it as a writer, and also, as you said earlier, influenced by fiction that you like to read. So if you could tell us both about both
What
things.
is the second part?
Just that you said that the short story form is something you like, and the way you write is influenced by the kind of reading you do.
Hmm.
So I thought maybe the reading you do for both these things, the writing that you do and the language, the specific texture of the language.
Hmm. I think, Kavya, I think because this is my debut book, and when you're writing your first book, you dream of getting published, but you're not very sure if it'll get published, when it'll get published, and that in itself becomes a blessing that you're not
Mm-hmm.
very aware of the reader, who is going to read it, how are they going to perceive it, whether they will understand all the local, little things that you've put in the story, and so you're sort of free of all that, and. And as a writer, I think I was particular that uh, I was not writing it for a reader, but I was
Mm-hmm.
writing it to tell the story of these characters.
Mm-hmm.
And because the things like a charpai or a kanji, which is a drink which is made with black carrots, and it's not something that the character needs any explanation about. So I did not feel the need to put in an explanation. And I mean, there's so many times when we are reading a book which is set even in England, and they'll talk about some candies that we've never eaten, but they'll not tell us what are the ingredients, how is it
Yeah.
made, or what is the Indian name for it. And if I, as an Indian reader, accept it and say, okay, it's a candy, but I don't know what it is, but that's fine. I can move on. And I hope that somebody who's not uh, you know. Does not have complete access to our language will be generous enough to do that for our books too.
That's a really lovely way of talking about that because, yeah, it's sort of like taking your location for where you are and
Yeah.
what you are. And that was very textured and it kind of felt Indian without having to explain itself. I guess that's what I was trying to say.
And as readers, I think we love that we don't want to read about everything that we know and we are aware of. We want to read about far off cultures, and we want to be taken. We want to know what they wear, how they eat, their mannerisms. When you read like a Junichiro Tanizaki book, you're in a Japanese household. You see how their rooms are laid out. You see the trees outside the window, and you want it to be as specific as it can.
Yeah, yeah.
And even if those details wash over you, you still, I mean, touched by them, or you still understand them in some way.
What are the kinds of books that have touched you in this way?
I think, like when I speak of Junichiro Tanizaki, his the Makioka sisters, uh,
Okay.
a cat, a man, and two women, which is a novella, but it's so beautiful. It's like a power shot. I thought. Um, I think Villa Carter's books, The Professor's House, which is it's set in the prairies, but and you feel you're there. I mean,
Mm.
you know what the prairies look like, but you're not absolutely sure, but yet you're still there. So
Mm.
I love that sensory. I like being taken out of my immediate surroundings and being transported through a book.
Yeah, yeah. That's very lovely because I guess as the way we looked at it was, as I told you when we spoke earlier, that we really like house stories,
Yeah.
and some of our colleagues really enjoy them. So we thought a lot about it from the perspective of that location. So I was
Yeah.
very curious if you also like house stories and
I, yes, I do. I definitely prefer them to office stories, I think. I think some like Anita Desai does a beautiful job of doing house stories, and when she does that, she is not really describing the rooms or the how the furniture is laid out, but yet, I mean, I don't know if you've read Clear Light of Day. It's a book that I can never stop recommending, and you know how like over years your favorite books change, but there's
Mhm.
some books that you return to time and again, and they still have that magic. and there are very
Yeah.
few books. And I mean, Clear Light of Day, it's a house set in Old Delhi, and
Mhm.
when I read that, I felt that I was there in that house. And actually, the story from the book 10 Bela Road, it's set
Mhm.
on the address 10 Bela Road, and the house in Clear Light of Day is 9 Bela Road. And
Oh
the
wow.
family next door, after partition, they moved to Hyderabad. So I was kind of in my own way as a homage. I was continuing what is going on in that house next door, which the Hyderabadi family probably sold to this Punjabi family, and they moved
Yeah.
in, sort of continuing the story from there.
Oh, that's so lovely.
Thank
That's
you.
really quite lovely. Um, and even in that story, the interesting part of it was a certain kind of nostalgia for letting go and
Mhm.
what it means to change. And there was that suggestion through the whole book because you feel time passing and you feel like these people are becoming other people. So for me, one of the most interesting parts of the book was the sense of like, if you're an 80s born person, from there to now, you can see how the language and the approach to life changes. You can see how different the grandmother in the first story is to Kavya later when she's in Paris. So that's one of the reasons I asked also, which is that while you say there's no chronology, there's definitely a passing of time,
No, there
and
is.
and concepts change through time, and that came through very, very clearly.
I mean, yes, there is a chronology, but what I was trying to say is that I didn't want it to be chronological to appear chronologically. To
Yeah,
I wanted for it to go back and forth in time. Yet, I hope that the Indian reader would still, and I'm happy to hear that you felt a passage of time through the book.
absolutely.
Just 30 years passed from the very first story, not the very first story in the book, but the story that's set in 1980,
Yeah,
Morning Visitor, till the last one, which is in
yeah,
2010.
yeah.
And like
And sorry, please go on.
I was saying that as a country, I mean, from 1980 to 2010 itself was such a transformative time with the economic liberalization of 1991. After that, India was a very different India. How we
Yeah,
ate, what we wore, what we watched, everything changed. How we thought of
yeah,
ourselves as people or as global citizens, that changed too.
yeah. And I think that what was really interesting in the passage of time, and you said earlier that it's about human relationships. Uh, this is where I felt it was so gentle. You were telling us where people were in the social order without kind of driving that home too sharply. So it was descriptions of someone eating kebabs and looking at another person's more affluent car.
Yes.
So you could see how they were positioning themselves. Also, a very interesting insight into masculinity, I thought, when these two brothers just ate but barely spoke to each other. And those kind of ways in which you held time, I felt were very, very effective because it almost happened to you as an experience in a way. And I'm curious if other readers felt this also, but for me, it was very evocative of that sense of place
Thank you. Thank you
because
for saying that. I mean, I just felt that it would be interesting to have these two brothers. One, they're brothers. Two, they're business partners. And three, they have built a very prosperous business. Yet they have this very fractured relationship, which is full of doubts and mistrust. And what happens when you put them in an enclosed space? And have them there, what would they, I mean, they don't even talk so much because their relationship is sort of broken. Yet there's this these moments of tenderness where one brother says that, let's not chop down the neem tree, because
yeah,
somebody has told him that their relation, the brothers relationship will break down if the tree is taken out of the factory compound.
yeah. Yeah, it was kind of in the silences that things came up because I felt like there was eating kebabs, there was watching TV at the end of a day, there was that sequence where they make the tutors making rotis, and his distance between his family and him kind of hangs, and the mother and daughter are drinking whiskey. I think the mother's drinking whiskey, they're having cake, and it's just sort of still. And there are lots of these stillnesses which kind of bring up the relationship really, really well.
Thank you, Kavya. Thank you for saying that. It means
Yeah.
I'm so glad that, it's such a beautiful reading of the book.
But I was really curious about how you imagined it because it's usually easier to write flourishes than silence, you know?
It's actually the other way around for me.
Yeah.
I find doing dialogue so difficult. I just feel that my characters just want to sit and watch time pass by, and they're like in Ten Bela Road, the protagonist, she's just sitting there playing jigsaw puzzle while the day is getting darker and darker, and
Yeah.
that's all my characters want to do, and I really have to make them talk.
Okay, so you have to actually make them
Yes,
imagine what they're going to say.
yes, they have nothing to say. I feel they would rather just sit and ruminate.
That's really fascinating. Maybe we can hear you read something from the book now,
Okay, okay,
so we can hear them ruminate a little bit.
okay. So I'll read a bit from the story Shirley.
Yeah.
Uh, so it starts here. The rain turned into a snow shower that bent and blew with the wind. Hema gripped the umbrella and pressed on. Across the road at the Bellevue, people sat at the bar chatting, their backs to the window, a fire flickering in the grate. Hema considered going in and ordering a cup of tea. If only she had a friend. She dug into her purse for her cap as she walked on. Shirley hadn't written this month, and Hema wondered if their friendship would fade eventually. Those evenings of leisure and long chats were certainly gone, never to return. Snowflakes turned to water as they touched the pavement. It had been spring like when she had left the house after lunch, but within an hour clouds had sealed off the sky, clouds as grey as those in the story she was working on this morning. She pictured the protagonist getting off the bus at Connaught Place, hair shabby, sari mud splattered, asking a man the way to the Bata store. She saw her working her way to Connaught Circle, while people waited under the eaves for the monsoon shower to let up. The second half of the story had unfolded in her head on the trek to and back from the post office. She liked the freedom of stepping out of the house whenever she wished, something she couldn't do in Delhi, where she had to report her comings and goings to her mother in law. Sanjay had bought a second hand car, and she too intended to get her driver's license. She wrote to Shirley last night sharing the news and only adding in the final line that she hoped very much to hear from her soon. She passed the umbrella to her left hand and buried her right hand in her pocket. Ahead, two boys in red and blue jackets relieved the dull scenery. She had lost contact with her childhood friends after marriage. The distance and the responsibility of a new life had made staying in touch difficult. Her cousin Meera was in Delhi, and Hema would visit her in her house adjoining the factory. And though they had never been close, their daughters played well together. Hema tried becoming friends with Sanjay's friends' wives, inviting them over for tea, going to sari shops with them. But she realized that there was no real basis for her friendship with these women, like there was later with Shirley. She cherished how Shirley belonged just to her, and she didn't have to share her with her husband or daughter. Matthew from next door was walking up the pavement, thick boots, collar up. He waved at her, she said hello, and they passed each other. The neighborhood was silent. Snow drifted down, powdering treetops and rooftops. The street lamps looked gaunt. She missed Delhi, the heat, the bustle, and the familiarity of it all. She scrubbed her feet on the doormat, took out the key, and let herself in.
Thank you so much.
Like I said, no dialogue and a lot of rumination.
Actually, it was very. This is bringing up another question for me before I attend to questions that people have asked, which is how you chose these characters because you have a kind of balance of different kinds of relationships. And I actually really like the Shirley story because it's about two women. And of course, it happens at a library. So it felt very interesting how you might have imagined that story. And Actually, someone also asked about your thought process behind using a second person point of view for the story in the outing.
So the first question was how I came upon these characters.
Yeah.
I mean, like for 1 hour, 3 times a week. I think the starting point for the story, the very first starting point, was not Mr. Lamba, but these two boys who lived in a house, and I just wanted to explore the kind of games children play, which is so childlike. And but while they were playing, I saw the image of the tutor who would come every few evenings to teach them, and the story shifted from the students to the teacher, and that's how I came upon Mr. Lamba's character. And he's probably like 3 or 4 or 5 home tutors that I've had over my childhood fused together and then added some more.
Yeah, that's really sweet. And in the outing, where did you find the perspective for that story?
the the outing was the perspective was very hard to find. I mean, telling that story in the second person was not my first choice. I didn't think that I would write a story in second person. I just thought that was very avant-garde and very experimental. But
Okay.
as I started to write the story, I first wrote it in third person past tense, and it was Kavya and two of her friends who make this journey from the house to Miss Sister Selena house. And but as I wrote out the story, I felt that like we talked about the voice, something was not right. It didn't feel the story was not. The story still felt like a story. It didn't feel like something that would actually happen somewhere. And
Mm-hmm.
so I figured out that her friends do not have anything at stake in this journey. It is Kavya's own personal pilgrimage, and so but Kavya at this point still didn't seem ready to take the journey on her own. So I got rid of one friend, and it was Kavya and one friend now. And because the story felt more urgent, I changed it to present tense, so third person present tense, and I wrote it out. And again, the story was not working, so I let go of the other friend also, and I moved it to first person and present tense. And but Kavya felt very stiff. She felt very, she didn't. She felt scared to take this outing on her own, and so I tried the second person, and I sort of brought the reader, stood the reader in her place, and
Hmm.
and the story automatically felt
Okay.
right. So that's how I arrived at the second person.
It's actually interesting because it seems like Kavya is the one who doesn't, we don't really know her relationships with the people who we've met otherwise,
Yes.
but we know her inner life a little bit more. So she seems a little bit more fragile than the others, even though, as you said, the house in a sense has affected all of them.
Yes. I think so. I
So,
think it's how we all process things so differently.
yeah,
Some things affect some people more than others.
yeah. I'm very pleased that you chose my name for her character, of
Oh,
course, because
yes, what a coincidence that was.
yeah, yeah. One of my colleagues said, yeah, there's a Kavya in the book, and I was quite
Yes.
pleased about that. Because I didn't meet many Kavyas in North India. So um, I'm also again very curious about why you kind of bookended it with these two, with something so far away in Paris. Like what the last story was longer, and what made you dwell there for a while as
Mm. I think it was as simple as the fact that I had spent some time in Paris and I always wanted to set a story in Paris. But I mean, I think I was there in 2010, actually, yes. And, and so 10, 12 years passed without 12 years. I don't know how much time passed, maybe 20 years passed. And I still didn't know how to write a story set in Paris. I tried many times and failed. And at last I thought, maybe Kavya is in Paris and let's see what happens here, what
okay,
she finds out, what she explores. And so that's how that story worked out.
okay. That's really interesting because it then felt like very much about her. The book felt very much about her
Yes,
because of that.
yes. I didn't know how the stories would connect. I wrote each story as it came to me. And I mean, I probably, when I was writing out these stories, Kavya had a different name in all three stories. And it was only when I had written six stories, I realized that, some of the characters were reappearing and all of them were connected to a family. And so there was, I mean, it was something that I chanced upon later. I mean, I always wanted to write interconnected stories because I like the resonance that one story creates uh, for another one and the context that it provides. So when you're reading one story, you just have a wealth of information already, and you're
Yeah.
reading the story layered upon that, in all that you know about the characters and the the world of this character.
Do you have other, what are your favorite collections of stories like that?
I've not read, I don't think I've read many interconnected stories, but two which really affected me were In Other Rooms, Other Wonders by
Yes.
Daniel Moinuddin. I thought it was beautiful, and it was subtly interconnected, but those connections made the book more powerful.
Yeah.
I liked, that it was, there were breaks. I mean, there were standalone stories, but there was still a continuous thread. So
Yeah.
I like that flow and that disruption, I think.
Yeah. I was actually reading A Visit from the Squad, which also has this. You can almost miss it if you don't pay enough attention, but when you notice it, like you said, you suddenly the context comes alive a lot more.
Yes.
So that's a very fascinating form, and again, we're fans of that form over here at the store. Yeah. So I just wanted to also. Oh, there's another question. Are there characters you'd like to revisit in future stories?
Mm. This is my friend Alita. Hi, Alita. Um, Characters. I was thinking about this just the other day. Maybe Hema and Shirley. And I mean, I'm not sure if I'll write about them, but they definitely fascinate me. I would want to know more about them uh,
Okay.
as as a writer and maybe also as a reader. And when I was writing the book, at one point, I wondered if I should turn this book into a novella, this story into a novella or a novel, but I was not able to do that. So I stuck to keeping it as a short story. But maybe Hima and Shirley would be two characters that I would like to know more about.
What draws you to them?
I think uh, I think their friendship, um, maybe to some extent, their how they are moving apart and in this friendship. And mm, not sure, maybe Shirley's pain somewhere.
Hmm. Yeah. That was again, like I said earlier, painful without being directly in your face. And so it kind of lingers with you.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, we have another question. Did you have this sort of a process with all the stories, or was it just outing that you kind of iterated and found the voice?
Sometimes, a story happens in a single setting, and it is so amazing when that happens. For me, Weekend in Landor came to me in one. I mean, I polished it, but most of it was written in one go. Um, but most of the stories I have worked on, iterated, thought about, gone back to, put aside. So most of the stories have been a long process, but Weekend in Landor was something that happened quickly.
Okay. And another question is, what came first to you as a writer? The house the stories are set in, or the characters that live in it?
The characters. The characters came first. It was just as I was telling you, it was much later that I realized that all the characters belong to a family, and or in some way are connected to this family. And they were already, I mean, 1 hour 3 times a week. That story already had the factory next to it, and even Morning Visitor, I knew that in the back there is a factory next to the house that the story takes place in. But it was much later that I realized that the house is central.
Okay. Yeah. Um, Someone just says, no question. It's a very nice concept and theme, and look forward to reading the book.
Thank
So
you.
I think we have produced a reader with our conversation. I wanted to ask you how long it took you to write this book. Was it a very slow and long process, or it's always been in the making for you? And did you imagine this is the first book you would write?
Yes, when I started writing, this was the book. I didn't know it would shape up like this, but
Mm.
this was the book that I wanted to write, and it took a very long time, 10 years or more, to write it.
And as someone was asking, like, what did it feel like to bring it into the world, to bring it into a publishing sector and manuscript and find a home for it?
Even now, when I see it, I'm just amazed that it's in the world. It's surreal to pick it up and see those stories that were just on my laptop or on manuscript sheets to be bound between the covers of a book. It was, and to publish it was easy and difficult both. I mean, publishing it in India was easy, but publishing it in the UK was a bit tough.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been both.
It's been both, okay. Which, of course, leads us to the question, can you tell us about your next book and when we can expect to see it?
It'll take a little while. I'm still working on it. It's set in Delhi again, and it's set in 1990s, 1990, the monsoon of 1990, and it's a story of a 12-year-old girl who's on this cusp between childhood and young adolescence, and how she navigates this cusp.
How lovely. We can't wait to read it.
Thank you.
And our favorite question for all writers, can you tell us a few books that you recommend for us as readers and all our readers who are here?
Yes, I think of late, it's very rare for me to read like more, 2 or 3 books by one author back to back. But Ani Arnaud is it's been one such recent writer, and I'm thrilled when that happens for me. That I want to read more and more by this author, because sometimes you just want variety, you want to read a different voice, a different story. Well, I read her A Man's Place, A Woman's Story, and Simple Passion. And they're small books, which works very
Yeah.
well for me, and very concisely, precisely written. And there's no, like, the language is straightforward. There's no ornamentation, there's no decorative words. And I think it's very hard to do that without, I mean, they're almost like crutches, not crutches, but they're like a little help for a writer to have these effects, this beautiful language, or but to do without all that, I think is very tough. And her books are part autobiography, part fiction, part memoir. I mean, she does not make any difference between these uh,
Yeah.
genres, and I think she's so good. Of
It's
course,
such a coincidence. I also read 2, 3 books by her just recently.
I was.
Possession, Simple Passion, and the Years.
Oh, I haven't read the years. Should I read it?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Which one? Which was the first
I know
one you
it's
read?
the book, but
Which
yeah.
was the first one you read?
Possession.
Possession. Oh, do you
It's
recommend
about,
it?
yes, it's about jealousy. It's very good.
Okay, I'll read it. I'll read those two.
Yeah.
So this is one writer's 5 works I would read back, almost back to back.
How lovely. Yeah. Yeah.
I would also recommend The Story of a Goat by Perumal Murugan, which is
Yeah.
literally the story of a goat. And I don't know how he does it. It's almost like reading the story of a person. Like, it's so vivid and it's so real. Yet
Yeah.
it's a fable. It's a parable, but it also feels like realist fiction.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. We're so excited that all his books are constantly coming into focus just by the
Yes.
power of their writing. And
Yes.
the
Actually,
recent book of
I spent some time with him at Sangam House in Bangalore. So now to come back to his, like, read more of his work, I just feel that I get to know him more by reading his work.
yeah, yeah. It's really beautiful and powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope we'll have these in the store to recommend. But of course, if you have any more books to make us read.
I'll always recommend Clear Light of Day by Anita Desai. Um, uh, uh, The Fifth Child by Doris Lessing, which is, I think,
Oh,
a wonderful book.
disturbing.
Very
Yeah.
disturbing
Yeah.
and uh, and attractive, because sometimes what is disturbing is also exciting and titillating, but it's not a titillating book, but
Yeah.
it draws you in with its
Yeah.
how it disturbs you.
Yeah. Yeah. I found it very disturbing, but it's quite spectacular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what else would I recommend? If somebody wants to read Godan by Premchand, or Gaban, which
Uh,
I think I like because I grew up in a city and not a village. I like Gaban even better than Godan.
okay. We'll make sure to make everyone read these books and post them on our Instagram and things. So I think we can wind up our conversation.
Yes. Thank you, Gaban.
And I just thank you so much. It was such a delightful conversation, and your book is an absolute delight
Thank you.
and a very restful book for many of us. And I just want to say, please pick up this book from our bookshop and also subscribe to our subscription box. We'll have another 3 months of this remaining. And Sonal, if you'd like, also, we'd love for you to read with us. So we'll tell you what we're reading next.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, and we really look forward to your next book.
Thank you. Thank you, Kavya.
So,
Thank you, Champaca Bookstore.
thank you and good night, and thanks everyone for being here.
Bye.
Bye.